Greetings from the headquarters of the UN System Staff College in Turin, Italy. I would like to welcome all participants and panelists on behalf of UNSSE and the Global Women Leaders Voices for Change and Inclusion. This is our first Thought Leadership Series in 2021. I'm Jafar Javan. I'm the director of the UN System Staff College and the moderator of today's panel. I'm privileged to be hosting this event that includes a panel of distinguished and accomplished women leaders and many participants that are following the live stream on UNSSE's YouTube channel. The event was developed to support the Secretary General's vision for gender equality and the empowerment of women. Learning has been an important part of colleges' initiatives targeted towards achieving gender equality. We at UNSSE believe that learning can enable women's economic, political, and social empowerment. This recognition of the importance of learning has inspired our Thought Leadership series and led to this event. We hope that today's session will be a space for us to gain and share knowledge on how we can all advance women's equal and meaningful participation. I would like to note that all the people represented here underscore a groundswell of advocacy in support of this goal. I look forward to a robust discussion. Now, please make sure to connect on social media with hashtag Women's Voices for an equal future. Now, it gives me a great pleasure to introduce the panel. Susana Malcorra, Dean of the IE School of Public and Global Affairs, former Foreign Minister of Argentina, founder of GWL Voices for Change and Inclusion. She organized the submission of the articles that led to this event, and I would like to express our big thank you to Susana for her support. In addition, we are pleased to have with us today Anita Patia, Deputy Executive Director, UN Women, Mayo Avila, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of El Salvador, Maria Fernanda Espinosa, President of the United Nations General Assembly for the 73rd session, Rebecca Greenspan, Ibero-American Secretary General, Purnima Mane, former President and CEO of Pathfinder International, Isabel de Sant Malo, former Vice President and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Panama, and Fatiha Serur, co-founder of the Justice Impact Lab and member of the Africa Group of Justice and Accountability, AGJA. I would like to also mention that regrettably, Angela Kane, Vice President of the International Institute for Peace in Vienna, who has submitted a paper but was not available for today's event. So thank you all for joining us today. So if I may begin by our first sort of question that can kickstart our discussion. The panelists have all made great strides in their careers, and I know that it has not been an easy journey. We would like to learn more about your personal and professional journeys. So if I may ask you the question, looking back on your personal and professional paths, tell us about the 2-3 factors that made you the leader that you are here today. Please note, because of time constraints, you only have 2 minutes to answer this question. If I may start with Susana, over to you.
Thanks, Jafar. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks to the UN System Staff College for giving us the opportunity. It's a very big question to answer in 2 minutes, but I will try to be very precise. For me, what was fundamental was the empowerment from my parents. The fact that my parents said to me that I could do anything I wish as long as I work hard to get there. So there was no doubt in my mind that I could achieve whatever I work for to achieve. So self-esteem, self-reassurance was fundamental. The second thing was to learn that the world is and was at the time even worse, not an easy place to develop yourself. But as my father used to say, if they had a problem with you, it's their problem, not your problem. So you move ahead. Again, empowerment. And the third thing is that there is not such a miracle in life that you from one day to the next become, a leader or lead a certain project. It requires effort, effort, and effort. And those three things got me to where I am.
Thank you very much, Susana. Let me go to Anita now. How about you, Anita?
Thank you very much, Jafar, first of all, for hosting this amazing panel. I'm really thrilled and humbled to be part of this discussion. Let me go straight to your question. I think growing up in India, it was impossible not to be a feminist because you see so clearly what discrimination means and how it is important to battle it from the day you are born. Like Susana, I was blessed with a family that believed in the power of education. And most importantly for me, I think I had not only a mother who was a visionary because she was an educator, but also a father who was a feminist and really believed in the value of girls' education, which I think is a fundamental lever to unlocking empowerment and opportunity for women. In terms of my professional life, before joining the UN, I worked for years and decades. I will date myself if I say how long, but I worked for decades on poverty reduction in my career at the World Bank Group. And one of the things you learn when you work on poverty is you see firsthand, I started my career working in Africa, how deeply feminized poverty is. And if we are to address the issue of building inclusive, just, equal societies, it has to start with women. So I would say my personal experience in benefiting from education and a family that believed in education as the lever to unlocking empowerment, as well as my professional experiences in seeing how deeply feminized poverty was and really wanting to bring that lens to the work I do, have been instrumental in shaping my journey.
Thank you very much, Anita. Same question to you, Mayu.
Thank you, Jafar, and to UNSCC for having us in this event. I am truly honored to participate with so many wonderful women. I would like to say the factor for me is my husband. I was born in a Latino macho society, and his support has been fundamental in my professional and personal growth. He had stood by me against cultural beliefs. For example, when we were married, I had not finished law school, and some would confront him and as he was letting me continue my studies. Then when I became part of a big corporation and needed to travel for work, those same people were questioning him for allowing me to travel all by myself. So his actions and his attitude showed me he believed in me and made me feel invincible, able to take on any challenge. Amongst those challenges, I became the first woman in my country president of a bank, and as well as the first woman minister of foreign affairs. We have grown together in these 42 years of marriage, and I have been blessed to have a support factor always beside me. For this, I am an advocate for male advocacy for women equality. It is particularly important that men stand and support us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mario. We already had only 3 panels, but it's been really inspiring and so interesting to listen to all of you. Thank you. Let me now move to Rebecca. Same question to you.
Thank you, and it's great to be with such a wonderful panel, so wonderful women that I love so much. So thank you for inviting us. Let me start by saying that the main factor was other women. I'm convinced that I wouldn't have been able to be where I am if other women didn't fight for my rights before. And that has been, I think, that the main factor that made my life different, including my sisters and my mother, that were also fighters for me to be able to get wherever I wanted. Growing up, I realize now that growing up, I internalized many of the stereotypes prevalent in society back then, yes? But what I didn't internalize was the ceiling glass or the glass ceiling. Probably what I expected is to do it all, but not to stop doing something. And that's why I believe so much in the importance of role models and inspiring girls, because it really makes you not to internalize the obstacles that society puts on you because of discrimination and inequality. And I think that the second factor that really galvanized all that is when I became a mother while my political career was going up. And that tension made me realize that I didn't have to be superwoman, that this was not a lonely fight, that we needed to go collective, that it was the fight of all women, not only my individual fight. And I became a feminist then, precisely then. And I think that that was a very important factor.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Let me now move to Fatiha. How about you?
Fatiha says, oops, thank you very much. Again, I lend my voice to my colleagues to thank you for the opportunity. Now, if I reflect like my colleagues have reflected, I'll start by saying I grew up in a large family. We were 11 children, right? And my mother was the most amazing human being and mentor and visionary, although not educated. And so I realized very early on, like Anita and my colleagues said, that education would be my best vehicle for achieving what I wanted to do. And I fought very hard to go beyond baccalaureate, even going on a hunger strike to convince my father that I had the same right to study. And then I did the same to get a job. So when I look back at my journey and to respond to what would be the 3 factors, at least in my own leadership journey, I would say, number 1, passion to serve other women, to serve humanity, and the vision of the path to achieve it. The second factor, and I think Susana spoke about that, is clarity of thought, focus, resilience, sort of resolve to actually continue within that pathway and empower myself while empowering others. Because one of the beautiful things I learned in my journey is that I think I'm empowering others, but actually their empowerment in turn has empowered me to continue. But I never lose sight of where I started, because that should be my driving force. And finally, my third factor, I think, in that leadership is humility and empathy. In other words, never forget when we achieve a certain level, that there is so much more that we can do and not be taken by the power of a powerful position. And finally, it's women like ourselves that empower each other and support us. And I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fatia. This really, there's so many good advices that's coming from this discussion. I don't know how at the end I can be fair and sum it up, because every one of you have really brought up really serious and very personal but powerful sort of advices and thoughts that you have on this question. Thank you. Let me now go to Purnima.
Sorry, unmuting myself. Thank you so much, Jafar, and for organizing this, and to everybody on the panel. It's such a delight to see some familiar faces and some that I know and respect very highly. You know, going so much towards the end of this panel, it means that I'm going to say some things that have already been said. And that's actually wonderful, because that's a good message to give. And the major factor I would always attribute is my upbringing. My parents had a major role in the sense that I didn't even realize that they were emulating or providing a role model or providing me a base of, into quotes, feminism, because they practiced it. They treated each other with respect. They treated us children with respect, whether we were boys or girls, didn't matter, equal opportunities. I was, like one of you mentioned, sent abroad at the age of 16, where everybody in India said, are you crazy? You're sending a 16-year-old abroad for 1 year to stay with another culture? But my parents had the courage. Not only that, they always supported me and gave me all the educational and employment, any opportunities that I could take. Nothing was forbidden. For my father in particular, I want to mention, because my mother was a working woman and a very accomplished woman. But my father always stood behind us as well and pushed us ahead. And the only thing he wouldn't let me do is change a flat tire. I can tell you that. That's the one thing he didn't allow. I think the other thing I would say is the opportunity of working with some amazingly dynamic and empowering leaders, male and female. Not only did they mentor me, they were excellent role models on leadership, but also on equity. They treated everybody fairly, with respect. Until today, I hold them responsible for the way I am, because I knew that if I followed that path, I would get to where they were, because they were amazing. And finally, I would say, I mean, there are so many things, but in the time we have, I want to be brief. I had lots of opportunities because of the way my parents were, and lots of encouragement. And of course, because my education and background helped, even though I also was brought up in India, like Anita mentioned. I faced my shares of failures as well. And I want to mention that because failure makes you resilient, it makes you authentic, it makes you humble. It brings you down to earth. It makes you realize what's going on around you. It teaches you a lot. And I'm almost grateful to my failures for bringing me to where I am. Thank you so much. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Purnima. I have to make a confession. As a 60-year-old man, I still don't know how to change the spare tire, but my wife does. So, so every time we travel, I hope she's in the car in case. Thank you. Thank you very much. Isabel, how about you?
Well, thank you so much. It is wonderful to be part of this fantastic panel. And I would say, before sharing my three major factors, that there is something that all of us share from what we've said. And it is that we have been surrounded by an enabling environment that has allowed us to get to where we are. And that is so critical and so important. And I think that's what needs to push us to continue to share these stories and push other women, because unless there is an enabling environment, we will not have been able to have the achievement that we've had. I would mention three things. First of all, my family as well. My parents were great examples and gave me, my brother and my sister, the same opportunities. And I can also share some stories about others, asking them how come I was 14 when I was sent abroad, and you know, that was not quite usual in a Latino society, and I had the opportunity, as did my brother. So from very early on, and their role models made me believe that it was possible. Second, I spent a big chunk of my professional career from a very early age with the UNDP. And I guess being part of a system that promoted equality, that promoted equal pay, that provided, and it was mandated to provide the same opportunities, made it almost for me to not realize that not everybody had those same opportunities. I cannot say that I was always a feminist. I need to say that it took me a while. It took me a while to understand that the majority of women around the world did not have the same enabling environment that I did. And it's amazing when you grow up seeing a different thing. And I need to mention as well fantastic mentors, men and women, but women in particular. One of them sitting right here, my dear friend and mentor Rebecca, who's been part of my life in different stages, and that is so important to let you know that if others have done it, you can do it, and that if obstacles have been overcome, you can also do it. So just to conclude, that enabling environment is what we need to make available for women and girls around the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isabel. And last but not least, same question to Maria Fernanda.
Well, thank you, Jafar, and thank you to the UN Staff College. Believe me that I feel so happy to share this space with such a powerhouse of women and start the month of March with you all. And I have to say that I grew up with three brothers and a loving father, but very conservative. Yet my mother was a self-made, very independent, strong woman. She was truly my role model. She told me very, very early that no one is going to knock on my door and to say, here you have, this is your opportunity, and that you have to work very, very hard. And I learned also very early to say no to household responsibilities that were not equally shared by my brothers. And, you know, one of my first career choices was not to become a lawyer as my father, my older brother, and I was expected to become one. But I went to the Amazon and worked with indigenous peoples as a linguist and as an anthropologist. I devoted about 5 years to working in the Amazon and learned so much from indigenous women. And I discovered that in spite of an apparent patriarchal social organizations, many indigenous women were the real power and the knowledge holders in charge of the food security, of the education, of the family and community economy. And in some cases, they were even owners of the land and the wealth of the family. And, you know, if I was thinking, what did I do 55 years ago for Beijing? And I worked to support the preparatory process for the participation of indigenous women from the Amazon to Beijing. I even published a piece, I recall, called Tracing the Beijing Conference from Below. And I started my international work first in civil society, in international advocacy groups, then intergovernmental organizations, and went back to national politics and multilateral diplomacy. So it's been a long, long journey. I agree with my sisters that you need an enabling environment. You need good partners, good female friends and supporters. There are many here in this group. And just to close, to say perhaps three takeaways for me. A good role model at home, which was my mother for sure. Choosing the career I wanted and not follow the professional path I was expected to follow. and in my particular case, perhaps learn from indigenous women and the value of diversity, you know, cultural and natural diversity as an asset. And they both, of course, go hand in hand. And I will just leave it there, and back to you, Jafar.
Thank you very much, Maria Fernanda. If I'm going to sum up everything that you all said, I think it will not do justice to the profound and very compelling and personal stories that you shared with us. So I'm going to leave it at that. And I think it's very clear you've basically answered the question very comprehensively. Thank you very much. Now, I'd like to move into some questions about the articles that you all have written, or at least some of you have written. These articles are geared towards sparking dialogue and invigorating learning. Each of these articles give great insight on global challenges and the situation of women and girls around the globe. I have very much enjoyed and learned quite a bit after reading each of these articles. Now it's time to explore the articles and also draw on the lessons learned. So I will ask a question to some of the authors that we have here with us today, but also to a question to basically the panels, even if we don't have an article from you. Now, we have 3 minutes for your answers. So let me start with Mayo. Okay. So in your paper, Mayo, you note that Maria, the protagonist, showed you that we need to invest in actions that guarantee that women like her have the opportunities and resources necessary to fully participate socially, economically, politically, and culturally. What actions do you think should be put in place for that to happen? Over to you, Mayo.
Thank you so much. My document is geared and inspired by Maria, who is a rural leader who organized more women to construct a vital road in her community, as so many men have migrated. In my country, a country of 6.5 million, we have more than 3.5 million who live outside our borders, and mostly 90% of them migrated are men. So to see her come up and take this women leadership, it's so crucial to complement social economic development, not only in my country, but in all, and especially El Salvador, where we have a gender dividend of 53%. We cannot afford to leave out more than half the potential leaders we need. We require effective laws, policies, and programs that focus on the person with co-responsibility from the state, the private sector, and civil society. So when there weren't enough men in this small rural community, Maria showed me that she could take action. She organized the other women to be able to put labor in, because the amount that we had gotten from the donor could only pay for the materials. So Maria showed me that we need to invest in actions that guarantee women like her in the most vulnerable and excluded conditions that the opportunities and resources necessary to fully participate are there. She showed us all that women can transcend the cultural role they are expected to play and can assume more responsibility than they are required socially. She led with empathy and inclusion, bringing so many more women to follow her example. 25 years later, while some progress has been made, the majority of Beijing's promises and commitments remain unfulfilled. It is our responsibility to contribute even more to diversity, equality, and inclusion throughout the world, delivering the promise to girls and women. So let us not forget the Marias that are still out there in the world and lend them that helping hand to build a better future for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayo. Let me now turn to Purnima. In your piece, the idea of child marriage, which forms the basis of your paper, is often entrenched in cultural norms and practices. How can we continue to ensure that women's and girls' rights are not violated on the grounds of cultural or religious norms? In your opinion, how could cultural and religious norms promote the rights of girls and women?
Thank you. It's a difficult question to answer in 3 minutes in terms of bringing about cultural change, which takes ages, but nonetheless, I think there are a couple of examples that we've seen around the world. But firstly, let me say that it's a fallacy to think that culture and religious norms are resistant to change, because they have evolved. Otherwise, you wouldn't have this panel of women sitting here. They are evolving. They are open to it. And many religious leaders, the problem is we see them as the problem rather than as the solution. And so working with them rather than against them is often a path to solution. And I have seen many examples of where change has happened, where groups of activists, women, have come together with religious leaders and cultural, the minders of culture, so to speak, which interestingly are often women, to bring about changes in policies and programs. Just take the example that we're talking about right now in terms of child marriage. In the case of child marriage, the data on girls dying in pregnancy and childbirth and the testimonies of the girls and mothers who had lost so much or who had gained so much because of education was what really turned their opinion, changed their mind and made them much more sympathetic towards delay in child marriage. And in this instance that I have talked about in the story, actually there was a change in 2 years in the age at marriage. It did go up, which means it did have an influence. But again, I want to emphasize that in order to bring about change, first of all, you need excellent policies and programs that are implemented. No point having them on paper. They need to be implemented. People need to know about them and how to implement them. Secondly, bringing into the fore women and girls themselves. They are their best advocates and their best champions. And often, as I said, they are the minders of culture and religious norms. So bringing in women, bringing in their voices to become their own advocates and empowering them to do so is a great way of making change. And thirdly, as I said earlier, working with rather than against religious and cultural leaders in order to convince them with hard data and testimonies in terms of what a difference it makes if you delay, in this instance, child marriage. And you can use this example for many other things. May sound easy, it's not easy, but nonetheless, it is doable, is what I want to emphasize. And I'll stop here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me now to Anita. What are some of the most important barriers to women's meaningful participation across all spheres of society? What interventions can we all put in place to support them?
Thank you, Jafar. And I'm going to start with the issue of women's leadership and women's role in decision-making, because not just because it's the topic for the CSW this year, but also because this has really come to the fore during the pandemic. And we saw how many countries which had women leaders really had much better public health outcomes and much better management of the crisis, which is not to say that there aren't enlightened male leaders, but I think this issue of women's participation and having a seat at the table is more urgent than it has ever been. And here I want to just share with our audience some key data points, because I don't think it is actually well known how backward we still are in 2021. You know, when you see a panel like this of very powerful women, you may be lulled into a false sense of complacency and think that this is the norm. It actually is not, because when you look at, and I'm going to mention 3 data points here. First, when you look at parliamentarians, it is absolutely absurd that in 2021, only 25% of parliamentarians worldwide are women. When you look at gender equal cabinets, it is ridiculous to think that out of all of the member states of the UN, only 14 states have gender equal cabinets. It is remarkable, shockingly and sad, that in this day and age, we have less than 6% of countries worldwide that have heads of state who are women. We have less than 10% of heads of government worldwide who are women. We have, if you look at key decision makers and how many women are represented in cabinet, we have countries where you have no women ministers. So to me, you know, this issue of women's participation and having a seat at the table, because that unleashes a whole range of good decisions, is fundamental. And to solve that, we have to start with, first, the issue of stereotypes, which can be overcome, as Purnima said, even though it is a long and hard slog, but it can be overcome. Second, the issue of actually violence against women, because there is violence against women that prevents women from having a role in public life. Third, the issue of policy change, because not all governments currently have quotas for women, and we need more countries to actually take affirmative measures to ensure equal participation of women. And finally, as has been mentioned in many of our personal stories, the need to involve men and boys in the gender equality agenda, because this is a universal agenda and it cannot be fought just by women alone. I want to say that I'm hopeful that we will see this change. If not in my lifetime, I want to see it for my daughter and in her lifetime. But you know, when we look at some really intractable issues that have been solved, if you think about a country like Ireland, deeply Catholic country, where it became acceptable to have gay marriage, you know, social change is possible. So this is what I would like us all to commit to, is a sense of urgency around changing the role of women in leadership. I could talk about a lot more things, but I wanted to focus on this leadership and decision-making role, because with that come multiple multidimensional good benefits. Thank you, Jafar, and back to you.
Thank you, Anita. Thank you very much. Just for the audience, please make sure to share your reactions on social media with hashtag Women's Voices for an Equal Future. Now let me go. Let's move to Isabel. Isabel, in your paper, you note that COVID-19 pandemic presents an opportunity for the Latin American region to build forward better. What steps do you think leaders in the region should take, particularly as they relate to women's empowerment?
Thank you so much, Jafar. And as we are all aware, COVID-19 has really transformed our economies. It's meant cost of jobs, cost of life, income generation, the livelihoods of millions of people affected. In Latin America, 9% of the population of the world is hosted in Latin America. However, we have 30% of those infected around the world, and we've had 20% of the deaths. In this framework, what is the reality of women? The reality of women is that women are juggling housework, children's education, remote work, and we just need to picture a typical household to figure out what's happening there. Look at spaces for work. If both parents are working from home, who gets the safe space without disturbance to be able to do that distance work? Who is expected to help children with school? Who is expected to continue to do the household work with the whole family at home? With some exceptions, most of the times these are women who are also working remotely. Today, according to McKinsey, 1 in 4 women are considering downshifting their careers or leaving the workforce entirely due to burnout and the burden that they're holding. Women are definitely exhausted with the challenge that this pandemic has represented for them. Now, what can we do about it? What should leaders be doing about it while we face reconstruction? We need to devote funds to the private sector, to those enterprises led by women. And this needs to be done consciously in policy making. Gender needs to be incorporated into the decision. And for example, we are giving funds to businesses to restart. What percentage of these businesses are businesses led by women? We need to consider, while we discuss, countries discuss, when are we going to open up schools? We need to consider what's happening to women that are being asked to return to work while their children need to stay at home. We need into every decision that is being made to incorporate the gender factor, to continue to support the work-life balance, to look at institutions and how they incorporate or not the gender perspective. Because if we make these decisions to recover, not taking the gender perspective specifically, we are not going to be solving the issues. Violence has increased for women and for girls as a result of the lockdown. And Anita has mentioned that it is more urgent than ever to have women sitting at the table. I think that's very, very important. We cannot be led to believe that we are sitting at the table, because we're not. We really are not. And if we want these decisions to be incorporate this gender balance, we need both men and women to look at the gender balance, but we need women to be sitting around the table. So I think those are the choices that leaders need to be making currently in order to ensure that the pandemic does not hit hardest women the way it is doing, and the reconstruction takes into consideration this factor. Just to sum up, incorporate the gender perspective on all public policy decision regarding the pandemic. That's what I would say, Jafar.
Thank you very much, Isabel. Fatia, my question this question is for you. Your paper is centered on a story about a woman in agriculture. Beside the opportunities in agriculture, are there any other opportunities available and accessible to the women in the region of Marawi? How do we ensure that women are more aware of the opportunities available to them? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Jafar. Let me start, first of all, by going back to what Anita and then straight now Isabel was saying, which is the importance of women's participation at a certain level to influence policy making. And it is important that they sit at the table and that their voice actually is a meaningful contribution to a decision being made. Why is this important? It's because it will affect women at different levels. And that's why the story on Marawi is very important. Going back to Marawi, it's a very remote area of northern Sudan. It's a harsh environment, opportunities are few and limited. Women in Marawi have got the potential to influence the economic level through household food security. They also have the opportunity for participating in transformative industry for organic food processing, handicrafts, and so on and so on. So the issue is that they are aware of the opportunity, but the most important issue is the enabling environment. In other words, what are the obstacles that actually limit their engagement and participation? And to me, our work in the international community is to support them to remove those obstacles so that they have equal and equitable access to resources such as water, land, to tools, to credit, because my learning throughout the years, and I think we all share the same point of view, is that without economic empowerment, women will always be at the receiving end of domestic violence, sexual violence, hunger, etc., etc. So in Marawi in particular, and it was my first experience in my long career in the UN, I realized that access to credit to those women was the most important element in terms of providing them with disposable income, being able to pay for school fees, etc., etc. So to me, it's linking the high policy level with the community level, because we will never achieve gender equality if we're not able to pull it together, and that we have amazing women at all levels. What we need to do is remove the obstacle to their visibility, to their ability to influence, to their progress. And so, you know, these women in Marawi are doing better and better, which means that with a little bit of support, we can actually support women to achieve a lot more. And one good action leads to two good actions, that leads to four good actions, and the multiplier effect, we say in French, tache d'huile, becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And this is what we need to keep our focus on. Over to you, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Fatia. To Rebecca, you make reference to the severe impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on women's economic empowerment. As an economist, could you elaborate and help us understand the economic consequences of gender inequality in the labor market? How can we all contribute to narrowing this gap? Over to you.
Thank you, Jafar. I think that many of the things have been mentioned in a way or another by the other participants. But let me give you some data and indicators of the very difficult situation women have gone through and are going through with the pandemic. First of all, because the pandemic interacts with the structural deficits that we had before. And so the pandemic really widens the gaps and the inequalities and the effects of the structural things and inequalities that we were going through. So let's put an example. Women are overrepresented in part-time jobs. They are overrepresented in the sectors that have been hardest hit by the pandemic. The commercial sectors, the service sectors, the tourist sector, for example, in Latin America, that is so important. So women are inserted in the labor market, especially in those sectors. For example, the gap in salary and pay for women, between women and men, the disproportional representation of women in the informal market without any social protection or social security systems to access to. So the problem that was mentioned by Isabel very firmly, the whole issue that stay at home for the pandemic has meant for women stay at home forever because the care economy has really weakened. There are no systems of care that have been stayed during the pandemic. So the disproportion of domestic work and care work that women has to do has come against women in terms of going back to the labor market. Already in Latin America, the numbers we have is that 33% of women are not going back to work. 33% of those women working, I am not talking about the informal sector that has been very harshly hit in terms of income. So all this has made a package for women almost impossible to bear without the right policies. Not to talk about the domestic violence going up 4 or 5 times in some of the countries we already know. So poverty, women's representation in the poverty group has gone up 22% during the pandemic, only in Latin America. And we are waiting for the final numbers at the global level. So the truth is, as has been said, that unless we really take into account the differentiated effects of the pandemic on the different groups, especially on women, we will take the wrong choices in terms of policy choices. And that's my fear. My fear is that because women are not represented enough at the policy table and in the decision-making processes, the decisions that will be taken will be the wrong ones. So we need women, and Anita and Isabel and many others have talked about it. We need women at in the table where the decision-making process is taking place. That's my first point. My second point, going back to Fatiha's point, is that women are not one woman. We are also a diverse group. And so we also have to take into account the different needs of the different groups within the women group. And rural women will have different needs than urban women, for example. And we need to take this into account. And my last point is still, we have a lot of obstacles in terms of finance and credit access to capital, and discriminatory normative frameworks in our countries. So we need to take action on those lines too. We need to end what we started, that is to take all discriminatory laws and normative rules against women economic empowerment. And we need to push for policies, public policies that will take into account the differentiated effects that the pandemic has had on women. And if we don't do that, we won't have economic recovery, we won't have a dynamic economic growth, and we will have a large proportion of the population having lost the rights and the progress that we have made in the last 30 years.
Great, thank you very much. Now to Maria Fernanda. As the president of the 73rd session of the UN General Assembly, did you see any direct or subtle resistance by your male colleagues who had some difficulties accepting the fact of having a woman president at the helm of the General Assembly? What was your response?
Well, thank you, Jafar. And I think that in general terms, you know, the UN working environment has dramatically changed in the past decade or more, perhaps. And I see that gender-sensitive lenses in all UN spaces, the UN Secretariat and the commitment of the Secretary General himself to put, you know, to have parity in high-level positions at the UN, the events you organize, the summits, the negotiations, the work of committees, everybody is watching, looking at the optics in a way. And there are several groups such as, you know, in-house groups working on that. The gender champions, the group of friends of gender equality, the circle of women ambassadors, which grows every day. And yet, you know, during my tenure, I had only one vice president of the General Assembly among 21, plus one committee chair. And, you know, we have to recall that when I was elected president, there were high expectations. I was only the fourth woman in 75 years of UN history and the first from Latin America and the Caribbean. I knew I had a big responsibility in just, you know, as an, so we are aware of that. The first female president of the General Assembly was from India, the second from Liberia, and the third from Bahrain, meaning all women presidents of the General Assembly have come from the Global South. So I felt a lot of pressure. I set up a group of gender advisors to my presidency, and I put together an initiative called Women in Power, with the support, I have to say, with women heads of state and government and outstanding women that were part of my advisory group. And we have one here, which is Isabel San Malo. She was then the Vice President and Foreign Minister of Panama, Kathy Calvin, and other members of our group of women leaders were part of the advisory group. And basically, I put together a mentoring internship initiative for young women in my office. I made sure that my cabinet had a full parity, meaning 60% of my staff were women. And perhaps here, another anecdote with my spokesperson. I was provided by Global Communications, UN Global Communications spokesperson. And I had to really push hard because I wanted to have a female spokesperson and a female from the Global South. It wasn't easy. There were a lot of, you know, bureaucratic processes to go through. But, you know, besides this, I think that, you know, we have to recall ourselves and the people that are connected to this conversation. Why is that we struggle so much for equality and to be represented in decision-making and to have our voice heard and our agency take part of societal transformation? And I think that my sisters here have been, you know, very, very bold and clear why. So it is not about spreadsheets for checks and balances to say, you know, women are underrepresented in government, in parliament, in high-level positions, in companies, in the health sector. We are overrepresented, as Rebecca so clearly said, in the underpaid or unpaid care economy, in the informal sector. And we can continue with a list. The gender pay gap, the wider digital gap for women and girls, the higher levels of violence in all its forms, etc. So why this is so important? I think that Isabel, Rebecca, Fatiha have been so clear. It is about, you know, in this current situation, recovering better, stronger, more resilient. It is about, at the end of the day, the quality of our democracies. It is about fairness. It is about our capabilities and contribution to society. And, you know, and here, let's also remember, you know, let's look at the performance of heads of state and government during the pandemic. You know, most success stories have come from female heads of state and government, New Zealand, Barbados, Finland, several heads of local governments, Kerala in India, etc. So I think that it is good that, especially in March, and close to the Generation Equality Forum in Mexico on the 29th of March, to recall why we are here, why we are speaking up. And you know, going back to your initial question, yes, there is you know, huge progress in the UN ecosystem, but there is much more work to be done. And I think that we are here for that. Thanks, and back to you.
Thank you very much, Maria Fernanda. Over to Susana. In your paper, you note flaws in how world leaders have responded to the COVID-19 pandemic. Are there any women leaders who have handled the pandemic well? What stood out for you, and how do you think other leaders can emulate this behavior?
Thank you, Jafar. It's hard to come at last because clearly my sisters have made strong cases from the different perspectives. I will start by saying that in my paper, I use a chorus line from Antigone by Sophocles. This chorus line says, "Tomorrow is tomorrow, future cares have future cures, and we must mind today." And I use this chorus line because I think it's a very good representation of how women handle everything. We care about today, but we are sure to invest for the future. And we all said that when we talk about our families and how our families had been so important in securing our education, which is, of course, the best long-term investment. Women have that capability to manage today without disinvesting in the future, which I think is one of our biggest challenges in the world. So there are examples of women leading the pandemic in manners that have been really significant. It's a big problem, a big challenge. And of course, we have had ups and downs. But when you look at what has happened in New Zealand, what has happened in Germany, just to use two examples of very different countries, you can have that sense of women understanding the multiple layers that are under this pandemic effect and how they connect those layers, and importantly, how they connect with their citizens in order to give a sense of direction and leadership that is fundamental when you have to ask for sacrifice from your people. I think the other important thing is that has been mentioned by my friends is that you need to be sitting at the table in order to make the right choices, particularly the right policy choices. When you have a prime minister, a chancellor, or a president that is a woman, you start with from a good position because you have the leader sitting at the table. Sitting at the table, having the fair representation of the diverse society, where of course gender is the first diversity to be recognized, is key. And we are talking about sharing power. Let's say it. The problem we face here is that when we request to be sitting at the table, be that the women in Northern Sudan, or be that the women in El Salvador, in the agricultural sector or at the highest leadership, when you ask to sit at the table, you ask for your share of power. And unless that is addressed, it is very, very difficult to think that we are going to get to the place where we need to get, that hope that Anita described for all of us. Only through that is that we'll get there. So there is no other way than to seek more female representation at the highest leadership levels, because through that, we will be able to influence policy design through a gender lens that really secures that the perspective of women are well taken into account, and secures that the new policies that will be designed after COVID will fully grasp the needs of women, for which you need to have data, and somebody already mentioned that is already a challenge. So women do make a difference. I'm not saying that only women. What I'm saying is that women are so underrepresented that has an impact on the policy choices. And we have seen that in the reaction to the pandemic. And as Rebecca said, we might see that on the policy choices that are taken moving forward. So it's time to raise our voices. It's not enough to say it. We have to make it happen. We need to go from words to deeds, but at least let's start to say and say it clearly. We need our power, the share of power that corresponds to us being more than half the population.
Thank you very much, Susana. And thank you all for your very rich, frank, and direct answers. Really appreciate it. Now to the audience, make sure to share your reactions on social media with hashtag Women's Voices for an Equal Future. Before moving into the next session, I just wanted to say that all the articles reflect a rich array of perspectives and policy analysis. This type of analysis is needed all the more given the challenges of COVID-19, which has set so many people back, particularly women. It is through leadership and women's participation that we can regain lost ground and chart an equal future. So thank you all. Now, we have many people following us on the UNSSC YouTube channel. So we asked them for questions if they want to ask any of you a question. We got many questions, but again, because of time limitations, we had to choose 3. So our apologies to all of participants who submitted questions, and unfortunately, we could not pick them and ask our panelists. So 3 questions from the audience. And first to Anita, and it comes from Ferdinand Carabella. What are the milestones of UN Women in promoting equal future for women?
So do I have 3 minutes or a couple of days? No, just kidding. So look, first of all, I think we have to say it is really fantastic that Ban Ki-moon, when he was SG, recognized the need for an agency focused on addressing this most fundamental of human rights violations, which is gender inequality. So the very fact that we have reached 10 years of existence is a milestone to celebrate. So I hope you will all join me in saying happy birthday again to UN Women, because we turned 10 last year. So this is a huge deal. And I want to just take a minute and just clap, because I think the fact that there is a single global multilateral agency focused on the issue of gender equality is very important. While at the same time, I think it is very important that gender is everybody's business and not just the business of the gender minister in a particular country, because you cannot deal with an issue like gender equality by making this just the job of a single agency or the job of a single ministry or the job of a single person. It really is a universal agenda. Now, in terms of accomplishments, we have seen, although the data that I shared on leadership is still pretty shocking and frankly antediluvian in this day and age, to be thinking about such a low representation of women, either in the public sphere or in the private sphere, we have seen a number of countries take really positive steps in terms of dismantling discriminatory laws. So we have seen huge progress in terms of normative change in many countries. I do want to say, however, that we are at a very critical inflection point where, because of certain democratically elected, undemocratic regimes, is the best way I can put it, we are seeing a pushback against women's rights that is a real cause for alarm and requires us to raise our voices very loudly about the fact that, as several people already have alluded to, that we risk not just not moving forward, but actually losing the rights that we have seen gained over the last 25 years. And why I say this when I'm talking about progress is because, again, I do not want us to be lulled into a false sense of complacency or not appreciate the need for great urgency at this time because of this pushback that we have seen, particularly in the last decade, which has coincided with the rise of democratically elected undemocratic governments, as well as authoritarian governments, as well as highly populist governments, which in many places have interpreted this populism as a reason to actually cut back on women's rights. Having said that, let me say that we have seen more participation, more attention to this issue of having women front and center in decision-making. We have seen a few countries, not enough, declare the need for a feminist foreign policy. Again, isolated examples, not at all a trend yet. We have seen the private sector step up to the plate, and we have seen many companies recognize that there is a need for gender diversity and equality, not just in their boards and in their corporate structures, but also in the way they do business and they think about the ecosystem in which they operate, whether it is suppliers, distributors, consumers, buyers. So we have seen increasing recognition of the need for gender equality in the private sector. But we are a long way from recognizing that gender inequality is a fundamental piece of building back better societies and building back better ecosystems. There is a huge amount of talk right now about building back better. But the big gap that we have seen is that all of the discussions that policymakers are having about the rollout of stimulus packages, none of these measures are yet holistically addressing the issue of gender inequality. Why do I say that? We actually have data on this. UN Women has worked with UNDP and has something called the Global Gender Policy Tracker. We are looking at every single country in the world and saying, as they build back from the pandemic, as they think about vaccinations, as they think about recovery, are women at the center? Are there new childcare policies? Are there policies to address the decline in female labor force participation? Are there more extensive social protection measures? And the sad truth is that women, even where women are decision makers, are not yet at the center of building back better. And the last point I want to make, Jafar, before I close, is that when you look at what has happened in the world on climate, and you see that everybody recognizes what a huge existential threat climate change is, we are now at the point where you have a really unique partnership between the public and the private sector, and where you see the private sector, for example, saying that climate risk is so big that it is an investment risk and that all decisions must be looked at from the climate lens. Now, of course, countries can do more, but we have seen more and more countries step up to the plate and make big commitments, but actually begin to implement. The thing that is missing in the gender equality agenda is this focus on implementation and a focus on driving financing towards implementation. The Beijing platform was not costed. This has cost the women's movement a lot, because in not focusing on costing and implementation, we have lost a lot of time. So the time has now come when everybody is focused on recovery and financing to make sure that this financing is really driving towards implementation holistically of policies that will create gender equality. So I wish I could have said more about progress. There has been some, but the key message that I want to give is that the progress is too small, not fast enough, and we need to take a real sense of urgency to it.
Thank you very much, Anita. I know I said we have 3 questions from the audience, but just to respect the time, because I know all of our panelists have to move on to other programs that they have and other events that they have to attend, I have to cut it back to 2 questions. So there is this, the next question is open to any of you. So if you are interested to answer, just please raise your hand on Zoom and you know, you will have the floor. So the second question comes from Rosa Rolla. Rosa writes, as Madeleine Albright, the former Secretary of State in the US, famously stated, there is a special place in hell for women who don't help other women. Do you agree with this statement? And how important was the role played by other women in your professional growth? Who wants to answer? Purnima, please.
I'm taking a stab at this. I mean, I'll take I think the second question we have all addressed, that women have played a very important mentoring and supportive and role modeling role in my professional growth. But let me also reiterate, so have men. So let's not leave them out. They have a responsibility to play that role, and they have played that role in our lives. They need to play that role in more women's lives in terms of encouraging them, mentoring them, supporting them. The second thing is that I also get impatient and angry when I see women not supporting other women. But I don't think I would make a statement as strong as Madeleine Albright. That's Madeleine Albright. She can be strong. Women and men are both imprisoned in gender norms and stereotypes. And it is even more difficult for women to break those barriers and get out of them. I'm not giving them a pass. I'm not giving them a pass. I'm putting the reality that it is much harder for them to get out of that. And they feel they have to be the carriers of culture and religion. So what I think needs to happen is to empower all women in order to be able to get out of that prison that, you know, we've been put into in some ways by society, to move away from that oppression in order to first empower ourselves. You can't empower anybody unless you empower yourself. I think we know that. So first empower themselves and then move on to small steps of helping other women. We need to hold them accountable, but if we take them to task in the way, you know, the statement has been framed, I don't think we're going to get anybody to come on our side. So let's get them out of that prison. That's how I see it.
Thank you, Purnima. Let's go to Mayo and then to Fatiha.
Oh, thank you so much. I'll be very quick because I admire Madeleine. And I agree with her statement in the role women have in boosting other women in so many fields. And I want to share my personal experience with Secretary Albright as the role she played instrumentally in my professional growth. When I served my country, we were only 9 female foreign ministers in the world. Madeleine was there with me as also a first woman in this role. So we got together and we made this little club with only one rule. That is, if I call you, you answer back. Knowing that they were there for me, feeling their mentorship and their sponsorship was vital, especially for me in a small developing country as mine, in my desire to do the best I could. Can you imagine finding myself having a direct line to the State Department only because I knew if I called, you would answer back? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayo. Let's go to Fatia and then to Susana and to Maria Fernanda. Fatia, over to you.
Thank you very much. Listening to Mayu, I smile and it touches me to the bottom of my heart. But I know, Mayu, we work together on the domestic violence. Madeleine's statement is very strong, and I think it's an indication of probably anger and frustration at what happens sometimes amongst our own ranks. But I would say it reminds us that, first of all, we, the women, have to be the first people to support each other. If we don't do it, then we will not encourage other people, men and women, to do the same. So to me, it's just reminding us of our own individual responsibility to support each other and to make sure that we bring more and more women like ourselves in the equality, gender equality journey. If we don't do that, we let other women down and we let ourselves down. So in my own experience, the women who supported me or inspired me, in what sense did they help me? First, they believed in me. And I think believing in your capacity to do something is very important. Also, something very important that I found in that is that they gave me the opportunity to find out and discover my own potential to support other women and to achieve, and allowing that potential to unleash so that we basically work towards a common cause. So the support that you get between women is extremely important. It's based on a sense of solidarity that I find extremely important. Of course, men can join that journey, but that sense of solidarity between women, in my view, in my experience, is unrivaled. Thank you very much. Over to you, Jafar.
Thank you, Fatia. Let's go to Susana, Maria Fernanda next, and then I see Rebecca, right? Okay, Susana.
Very briefly, I have discussed this with Madeleine. So I know first, Madeleine being Madeleine has come very, very hard. But what she has said to me, and it's something that we must remember, is that there was a period some couple of decades ago where the role model for women who were becoming leaders was essentially a male role model. So often that meant a competitive-based role model. Instead of that association that Fatia just described, it was a much more on a competition base. So that's one of the reasons why Madeleine was calling for this. Because if you think about as women supporting, enabling, really creating an environment of co-support, then there is no chance for that call. But there were moments where we had gone in a different direction, or some women had gone in a different direction in order to occupy part of that power table. So I think that's what happened, and no question I have had role models and support from women colleagues. Some of them are sitting here virtually this afternoon.
Thank you, Susana. Let's now go to Maria Fernanda. Over to you.
Well, I'll be very, very quick because I can only say that I am in full agreement with what my sisters have said. But, you know, truth be told, what we call sorority is not always part of every women's DNA, I would say. You know, and this is because of upbringing, of cultural stereotypes, religion. And I believe that it has to be built deliberately. And this is also part of the importance of coaching, for example. And I think it really pays off, you know, solidarity pays off. We are so much more powerful when we act together and when we act in solidarity. And I have to say, in the field of politics, this is really not always the case. And believe me, you know, sometimes ideological stance have more weight than our gender solidarity. And you know, in my experience, I think we have to speak up on political violence against women. You know, no matter, you know, which corner of the ideological spectrum this person comes from. And I have tried hard, and believe me, it has been a tough call. When you speak up, you know, to say, no, this is really unacceptable, even though it is, you know, a member of the opposition. And I think we need to change our political culture at home. It's easy to say, difficult to do, but I think that there is a lot we need to do, and that's why I feel so touched and energized with the company here, because I really, and these are not just words, I have learned so much from people here, sitting here, and I won't say names, but they know we have been in battles together, and we need to continue to do so. So sorority has to be, you know, a deliberately built, you know, quality of us, of women in all walks of life, of course.
Thank you very much, Maria Fernanda. Over to Rebecca.
Yeah, very quickly, because really what all of you have said is something that I embraced and it has been so inspiring even to think about the answer to the question, Jafar. But let me say that the first thing is to recognize that the gender roles don't affect only men. Gender roles affect us all. We reproduce gender roles as much as men, unless we get to be conscious about it and play, you know, and make an effort in ourselves also. And probably many of us, I suppose, when we talked about our personal experience, many of us became a different person when we realized how much we were reproducing gender roles in one point in our lives and our family cycle, etc. And I think that then when we talk about a transformation and educating in different with a different model, we are talking about doing that for men and women, not only for men. And I think that is very important. I think that the whole world, in all of what we have saw in this pandemic, we have to say that we need more cooperation and less competition. Many of the things that have gone wrong during this pandemic is because a competitive model was in place, and we needed a cooperation model for the pandemic, for the vaccines, for making a more effective stall of the virus. And the competitive model has to be put into a question, and that is true in every part of society. So I just want to say that what my sisters have said is exactly so. But we have to think even more far, not only about women, but about society. This society, to build back better, we will need to put coordination and cooperation at the center of the effort. And we women have to do that too.
Jafar, you are muted.
Okay. I finally did it. I was worried, but I did it. So let's go to Isabel.
Thank you so much. I will be very brief because I can only say that I agree fully with everything that has been said. But first time I heard that message from Madeleine, I just took it to myself and I repeat it every time that I can, because I think it is so true. And it is so true because I believe there was a day, and things have changed, when perhaps women, we were harsher on other women. We cannot say that that is not true. It still happens, but I am very positive that it is changing. And women, we can be competitive, and we can be competitive with other women. But I really think that is changing, and I only see more and more mentorship and women stating that they will not sit at a panel unless there is another woman, or at a cabinet table unless there are others, or at a board table unless there are others. And I think that is very powerful. So agreeing to everything that has been said before me, I will just say that I love that message from such an amazing woman as Madeleine, and I think it is true.
Thank you very much, Isabel. And thank you so much to the panelists. We're 2 minutes beyond our time limit, so I just wanted to thank you all. Really, this distinguished panel, immense thanks to the panelists and audience members for taking part in today's event. Thanks to everyone in the background that has made this event possible. Please check our website on www.unssc.org and follow us on social media to know more about our next Thought Leadership Series session. Again, thank you all, really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day, stay well, and hopefully see you soon in person. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thank
Thank you, Jafar.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye, Jafar.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.